I went through every single detail about Elbaf to figure out what will happen in the Elbaf arc. And honestly, it could be one of the best arcs in One Piece. So we're gonna start by looking at Little Garden, which sets up several plot points for Elbaf. And at the end of the video, we'll be discussing the massive new revelation that could result in Kid, Shanks, Dragon, Blackbeard, and more all coming to Elbaf. But first, allow me to reintroduce you to Dory and Bragi. These were the first giants in the story that introduced us to the island of Elbaf. And specifically through them, we learned about Elbaf's strong warrior culture, which is actually our first plot point. You see, the Elbaf giants have made their warrior pride and honor their treasure, valuing it above all else. This is why Dory and Bragi battled for 100 years over a minor dispute, believing that the god of Elbaf will ultimately protect the person who's right, making them the victor of the battle. But in the end, that's not what happened. As we saw in Little Garden, Mr. 3 interrupted the fight by planting bombs in Dory's drink. But because of Dory and Bragi's strong belief in their pride and honor, it didn't stop the fight. And the end result was both of them on the verge of death and defeat until the Straw Hats came in clutch and saved the day. So doesn't it feel like Oda made a point that Elbaf's ways were kind of problematic? Because before the giants were saved, we even saw a glimmer of doubt. Specifically, Dory thought about how cruel it was that they were about to be denied of an honorable death despite doing everything the right way. And I think in Elbaf, this type of conflict will rise again. There's bound to be some misunderstandings because while the giants are very strong, they're often not very smart and are easily tricked. And with the other manipulative parties that will be in this arc, this conflict could get even spicier, but more on that later. Speaking of Elbaf's culture though, it's also connected to another plot point, and that is Usopp. Because when he saw the warrior pride of the giants, he finally saw the brave warrior he wanted to become. So much so that at the end of the arc, he said, "I will definitely go to Elbaf." And ever since then, he's always been connected to Elbaf, so we should definitely expect him to get more screen time in that arc. But where it gets most interesting to me is the potential involvement of Usopp's other idol, his dad Yasopp. You see, Shanks and the red-haired pirates could be involved in Elbaf for multiple reasons, one of which we'll discuss near the end of the video. Another reason is actually the theme of Elbaf. With Dory and Bragi, we saw that Elbaf was inspired by Norse mythology, with both of them being modeled after Vikings. And coincidentally, the other pirate crew that has connections to Norse mythology are the red-haired pirates. Now, this is a pretty minor connection, but with Elbaf being destined to be an arc where Usopp gets more screen time than usual, it could be the perfect time for the father-son reunion. And that reunion could get complicated, because in proper deadbeat fashion, Yasopp left Usopp when he was just a little kid, so he doesn't really know him. In fact, he probably only knows him through the stories and bounties he's read. So he could be expecting a Sniper King God Usopp that's part of a Yonko crew when he meets him, and Usopp will probably lie to keep up the facade. Of course, eventually, Usopp will have to prove through his actions that he's strong and brave in his own way, leading to what could be one of the most emotional and epic Usopp moments in the story. But that's just my speculation. To wrap up the plot points established in Little Garden, there's one last X factor, and that is Vivi. Because Vivi was with the Straw Hats when they went to Little Garden and found out about Elbaf and the Giants. And given her situation right now, Elbaf could be the perfect time for her to return. After the events of the Reverie, Cobra was assassinated and Vivi has gone missing. And most likely she's not going back to Alabasta because Oda gave us a hint through Wapol. Because after the Reverie, Wapol leaked some information to Big News Morgans, and the only exclusive information he should know is that Vivi traveled with the Straw Hat Pirates. So if he leaked that information, it would make Vivi a criminal with no place to go besides the Straw Hats. And do you remember the last thing Vivi asked the Straw Hats before their goodbyes? So I'm fully expecting the return of Vivi and Elbaf. As for how she returns, the answer is simple. Donsai was also at the Reverie and he could have saved her. And not only does he have a Viver card to Luffy, but the Grand Fleet could also be on their way to Elbaf. For now though, we move on to the next plot point, which is the lore. Because Elbaf is where we finally should get some answers that we've been waiting for, from Kaido's race to Elbaf's history. But where we're gonna start is actually the lore of pirates in Elbaf. Because do you know what was one of the main sources of inspiration for Oda creating a pirate story? It was the Vikings, who were the original pirates and the main theme of Elbaf. Even the first giants that we meet in the story are all pirates. You see, so far we've learned about the giant warrior pirates and the new giant warrior pirates led by Hadrudin, but we also found out that the respected chiefs of the Elbaf village Joru and Jaru were both former captains of the giant warrior pirates as well. So it seems like piracy is a pretty common and respected custom for the Elbaf giants. And where it gets interesting is that given the long lifespan of the giants, they should have plenty of stories to tell with some critical information. First off, these stories could finally give us answers on the history of the giant race, because while Elbaf is a well-known island of giants, we found out through Saul that there are other giant settlements across the world. Saul himself is from the South Blue and even called the Elbaf giant savages. So what exactly is the history between all of these different settlements? And why exactly are some of these giant tribes so drastically different genetically? For example, the Yeti Cool brothers are from an unknown giant tribe and they look completely different from regular giants. Not only are they a pair of big old furries, but they're also twice the size of regular giants at 42 meters. But of course, even their size doesn't compare at all to the ancient giant race. Little Ors Jr. stands at 60 meters tall, while Ors stands at 67 meters. And the scary thing is, the original Ors might be way bigger than both of them. You see, Ors was known as the continent puller because he was so big that he could pull continents together to make his own country of ruffians. But the Ors we saw in Thriller Bark, do you really think he's big enough to pull continents? Because in Wano, the Straw Hats even compared Ors to Vegapunk's failed ancient giant experiments, the numbers, further hinting that Ors might be a fraud. On top of that, Oda possibly dropped another hint with Little Ors Jr.'s Jolly Roger, which actually says Ors the Third. So I believe the Thriller Bark Ors is the real Ors Jr., while the original Ors is probably Onigashima. Because if that's a real skull, that's the size of someone that can actually pull continents. Also, the skull has the exact same horn features as Ors and Little Ors Jr. And coincidentally, Wano also looks like a country that was literally pulled together. It feels like too much of a coincidence for all of these things to be connected, so I'm expecting some confirmations in Elbaf. Most likely, that will also unlock part of Kaido's backstory with answers about his race. You see, Kaido has been confirmed to be an Oni, but we've never gotten the full story on what an Oni is and why their horns look so similar to the ancient giant race. And in relation to Wano, we still don't know why Kaido settled on Onigashima, which Marco hinted had a different name before. So could it be the previous name of Onigashima was actually Ors and Kaido's Oni race is a long-time descendant of the ancient giant race? These are questions I wanted answered in Wano, but we'll definitely be getting them in Elbaf. Speaking of Kaido though, let's talk about his potentially dead partner, Big Mom. And with Big Mom, I don't want to spend a ton of time on her, so let's put 15 seconds on the clock. So obviously she has a deep connection to Elbaf, so I think it would make sense for her to get involved in the arc, especially because if she was really dead, her character would feel like it got wasted in Wano. But also I'm kind of tired of Big Mom, so honestly, keep her in the lava. Instead, let's talk about something more interesting we found out through Big Mom, and that is Prince Loki. Now, did you guys have the same exact reaction I did when you found out that Loki was the Prince of Elbaf? Because my reaction was, that guy's a problem. Obviously, fictionally, Loki has always been a villain, whether it's Norse mythology or the MCU, and even his portrayal in the story of One Piece has been kinda ominous. Big Mom literally gained the wrath of all giants after what she did in Elbaf, but Loki was ready to throw all of that away because Lola made him break No Nut November. Doesn't it feel like he has a little too much power in Elbaf? I mean, even the guy's silhouette looked creepy. And bringing back the conflict of culture, doesn't Loki feel like the exact type of person to manipulate the giants to gain power? Because throughout the story, we've seen the giants get tricked, whether it's Mr. 3, the Marines, or Mother Caramel. And with a princess based off of the god of mischief, there's gotta be something going on, and I expect the Straw Hats to run into those issues. But now we get to the reveal that completely changed everything for the Elbaf arc. And that reveal is Jaguar D. Saw still being alive and how he has inherited Ohara's will by collecting their books and bringing them to Elbaf. Now, first and foremost, we gotta talk about the lore, because that's what the will of Ohara was. Professor Clover and the archaeologists had figured out a massive portion of the Void Century, but one of the things he was unable to reveal to us was the name of the Great Kingdom. So with Saul collecting those books, we will finally find out what the name of the Great Kingdom was, possibly even some information on Luffy's Devil Fruit. Because during the Big Mom flashback, we saw Elbaf also believed in the Sun God. In fact, it's one of the reasons why they fast during the winter solstice. So with Ohara and Elbaf's knowledge combined, there's bound to be some massive hints about the Void Sentry, the Sun God, and even Joy Boy. But more importantly, there will also be information about Poneglyphs and Laugh-Tale, which everyone will be after. And it starts with Eustace Kid, who recently mentioned that he's going after the man marked by flames, who is definitely Saul. So with Kid seeking this knowledge, it's definitely gonna lead him to Elbaf, but he's not gonna be alone. Shanks is also making his move for the One Piece, which will give him multiple connections to Elbaf, including Kid, who he has beef with. Meanwhile, we also recently found out that dragons started the revolution Revolutionary Army because of the O'Hara incident. So could he also be involved in this Elbaf conflict that revolves around critical information on the world government? And if all of these parties are getting involved, do you think Blackbeard's gonna sit on the sidelines? Probably not, so he could also be added to this massive event, which might just be Ragnarok. That's right, one of the biggest Norse mythology events could soon be unfolding in front of our eyes in Elbaf. And Oda might have foreshadowed it hundreds of chapters ago. Because there's one final party that will definitely be in Elbaf that we haven't talked about yet, and that's the Straw Hat Grand Fleet. Not only is Hadrudian a giant from Elbaf that has connections to the Straw Hats and Saul, but as mentioned earlier, Don Sai could be going there as well with Vivi. As for the rest of the Grand Fleet, the narrator once teased that they will cause a great incident of historic proportions. That incident might just be Elbaf's Ragnarok. For the time being though, you could check out this video on what I think Garp's up to.